Welcome to Change Your Mind Transformational Dialogue Talk Radio. This is your host, Dr. Craig Weiner, and I have the great pleasure today to introduce a friend and colleague and life-transforming change agent, Marilyn Schlitz. We are here today to be able to explore what things change your mind, what is it in ways that we can live that can transform our lives, and Marilyn is absolutely the perfect person to talk to about this. Marilyn is a social anthropologist. She's a researcher, writer, trainer, educator, and she's a fabulous public speaker because I've personally gotten to hear her speak up at Hollyhock in Cortez Island. Right now, she's the ambassador for creative projects at IONS, which, if you don't know, is the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where she served as president and CEO. She is a senior scientist at the California Pacific Med Center, where she focuses on health and healing in a very broad sense. And for more than 30 years, she has really been a leader in the field of consciousness studies, making huge breakthroughs in research and writing and exploring all different aspects that we're going to talk about today. Her research and publications have focused on personal and social transformation, on mind-body medicine, and much more. She works as a leadership director and instructor for government and business and non-for-profit groups, and her work really does give her a unique ability to help both individuals and organizations identify what they need to develop as far as skill capacity to really be 21st century leaders. So it is my great pleasure to introduce and say, hi, Marilyn, welcome to the line.
Thanks, Craig. Nice to be here.
This is fun. I've been looking forward to this ever since we first met this summer. And while I always have a little bit of agenda of where we're going to go, I also really like it to be spacious enough to go where it's supposed to go. Is that okay with you?
That sounds good.
Great. So where I would like to start is just a little bit from your perspective of, and this is going to be a really big question, but how did your life move toward being focused on transformation, really, on changing people, individuals, cultures? Where did that come from? Because often that starts early in life, but I'm curious what it was for you.
That is a big question, and I can't say for sure. I know that when I was 18 months old, I swallowed lighter fluid, and that was a very traumatic experience. Ended up in and out of intensive care for a couple of months, and while I don't remember any of that, I think that there was a beginnings of a call to understand healing, understand that fine line between life and death. And then when I was a teenager, growing up in Detroit at a time when there was tremendous social unrest and we were experiencing the kind of racial tensions, class tensions, gender tensions. And I remember at that time really feeling very impotent, wanting to see change, wanting to see something that was more functional in the world. But, you know, as a 15-year-old, not feeling that I had much capacity to do that. About that time, I was in a motorcycle accident, and at that time, I had an experience of what you could call an out-of-body state, where I actually, as my body was thrown off the motorcycle, watched that body tumbling through the air from the vantage place of something above it. And then I landed with a thud on the ground, and there was talk of amputation. So the first thing was this idea that my consciousness may be something that has capacities that weren't just about my embodiment. And the second piece was that because there was this serious accident and a serious laceration in my leg, there was the talk of amputation. I went home and I somehow had this idea to visualize my immune system healing my body. And so I would be laying on the couch in my family's living room and really feeling the tingles in my leg as my mind was attempting to direct my immune system to heal. And when they took the cast off, it turned out it was all fine. And 66 stitches later, I still have two legs. And I think that those incidents in many ways propelled me to want to understand better what are the powers and potentials of our consciousness, how are we capable of making life-enhancing changes. And then I guess when I ended up at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan as my undergrad, I discovered two books. The first was Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And that book was really powerful for me, as it was for a lot of people who read it, with the idea that we live in a paradigm or a worldview, a model of reality that is not fixed or absolute, and that even in the bastions of science where we think that, ultimate reality is decreed, we found that over history, these models have changed periodically over time. And for me, that was a great liberation, because it suggested that what we were living in terms of the crisis of the times, wasn't absolute or fixed, and that, in fact, there were other possibilities. And following on that, then, I discovered the book Psychic Exploration by Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut. And Edgar is the founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and so this was back in 1977, before I really knew ions, but I read his book, and basically it was a group of serious scientists who were attempting to challenge the paradigm of Western materialism, and doing it through rigorous research, controlled experiments, and I just knew that that was the track for me, that I wanted to be a paradigm shifter. I wanted to be on the cusp of a revolution that could transform our worldview. And from that point on, I, went to graduate school. I did a couple of postdocs, and I ultimately ended up at the Institute of Noetic Sciences almost 20 years ago now. Without applying for the job, I ended up working for the organization that was founded by the person who really had such a major impact on my life. So that's
great, and I'm going to definitely want to talk about ions. What I'm just absolutely thrown by in listening to the story now is what we call the premonition-type experiences. I mean, we're going to go into the art of transformation and living deeply, but, knowing some about it, knowing that it begins with a catalyst, we can see the catalyst experiences very early on in your life for moving toward transformation from the accident. When we look to, the impact that you've had at 20 years of ions and being impacted by his book many years earlier, I mean, if you look early in your life, it's almost like you were given a roadmap for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. It's pretty fascinating.
That certainly does feel like the case.
Yeah. Do you see that a lot with people in the work that you've done with transformation, that those early seeds show up early in people's lives but become recognized, seen, understood, and manifested later? Is that a theme that you see?
Well, we certainly know that there can be these primers as people develop in their lives, and in the research that we ended up doing in a more systematic way, we looked at what were the catalysts that brought people to these transformative moments. They almost always involve some kind of what I'm going to call a noetic experience, a deep, intuitive, personal, direct experience with something. So it's not about logically sitting there and thinking, yes, I'm going to plan out my life and it's going to look like this. It's really listening for that call within us, and then sometimes that call takes a long time to incubate. Sometimes it takes multiple little calls in order for people to be pushed to that moment of, profound, deep, lasting transformation.
Excellent. So you also, and knowing a bit about you personally and some of the explorations, got taken in a lot of different directions between your postdoc, the work at Stanford, around the world. Could you share a little bit of how you've kind of balanced the work both in indigenous cultures and also in the pillars of science at Stanford and in Ecuador? Could you speak a little bit about how those have come to shape really what your mission and passion is now in personal and cultural transformation, and how those have blended?
Well, one of the things we do in our book, Living Deeply, is we have a life mapping exercise. And, we can look backward in our lives and begin to see a pattern or a storyline or the hero's journey. But, truly when we're in the middle of it, it's not so obvious how the different points connect. But I guess I have always been called to understanding the nature of healing from the earliest research that I did in the mid-'70s. I'm interested in the powers and potentials of consciousness. And so what are the reaches of our consciousness? How is it that our thoughts and intentions can influence ourselves, our bodies, our minds? how does that awareness, how does that direction of consciousness impact our relationships with one another? And are there these kind of transpersonal qualities of consciousness that transcend our physicality and allow us to, reach out and engage with somebody who might be on the other side of the planet? These questions have always interested me and have, propelled a now many-decade research program. So in looking at consciousness, began really in a laboratory setting, looking at remote viewing, the possibility that one person can describe another person's surroundings, through a double-blind kind of process, so they don't know where the other person is.
Actually, our last show was with Stephen Schwartz, and I know you know Stephen, and I love that you're exploring and doing the best to validate, because as much research as is out there, as you're finding, people still say, oh, that can't be possible. But you're really out there working to objectify and validate that possibility.
Well, and then I think what happened for me was, in my curiosity about consciousness, I have always really respected and appreciated the scientific method, but it wasn't necessarily enough for understanding the richness of lived experience, and I wanted to stay in a disciplined fashion. So I ended up in anthropology because they do qualitative research. They're actually mapping life experiences, focusing on culture as it's lived. And so as I was interested in healing and the extended reaches of consciousness, I was also interested in how one might explore that in natural settings. So that led me to many years of graduate training in social anthropology, medical anthropology, looking at healing practices around the world, looking at how people utilize their discourse, their language to assert power, and in that process create practices of alternative healing or the power of prayer and healing. These are all areas that I've looked at both from the qualitative, field-based, experiential point of view, but also then from the laboratory, also, have done work on the clinical implications of distant prayer on wound healing. Did that through California Pacific Medical Center, was funded through the National Institutes of Health to do that. Mm-hmm. So it's been a blend of methodologies more than it is sort of a kind of random collection of ideas. It's been, how can I understand the bridges between consciousness, healing, and culture through these different methodologies? And so, whether it's the randomized controlled trial in a laboratory, whether it's out in a field setting in the depths of the Amazon working with the indigenous people there, or whether it's working in a hospital and looking at how people heal under well-controlled clinical circumstances. I think all of those methods offer some insight into this notion of transformation and ultimately transformation as healing.
Well, you've led a rich and diverse life, and yet there's still so much more to go. It's fabulous just to hear all the different aspects, and you feel like a sister to me as far as interests go. I'd like to move from the personal into just even the idea with the book of Living Deeply, how it was that you even came up with the idea of maybe there really is a pattern or a science or a path to this, because transformation has always felt like such a personal and individual process. And yet there are commonalities that you'll talk about. So how did just the idea for the book come about, that there was a way to kind of map this out?
Well, there's no simple, short answer to that, but we, at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, Edgar Mitchell, as the founder, really experienced a deep and profound worldview transformation himself when he had the opportunity to be part of Apollo 14. He walked on the moon. He successfully completed his mission. And then he describes having the window seat on the way home. And from that vantage point of deep space, looking at the rotation of the sun, the moon, the earth, the sun, the moon, the earth, and kind of watching the earth rise rather than set, and feeling this profound epiphany of interconnectedness. And, you know, he was an MIT-trained engineer. He wasn't a woo-woo guy. And so this notion that his physics had taught him that the only valid reality was that world out there that could be manipulated or controlled or measured. And yet in this moment, in this epiphany experience that he had, there was this sense of interconnectedness and unity, and that was very blissful for him. There was also a second part of his epiphany that people don't talk about as much, which was a deep sense of pain and suffering. As he looked down at planet Earth, you know, one of those early images that we've now all kind of habituated to, but, you know, he saw this pristine, perfect planet and realized that all the pain, all the suffering, all the conflict, all the divisiveness that we experience as a civilization is not inherent in planet Earth, but really inherent in each of us, in our consciousness, in our worldviews. And rather than thinking that the great exploration needs to be directed toward outer space, he really began to think that the great frontier for the future would be inner space, and trying to understand these powers and potentials that lie within us to bring about a more just, compassionate, and sustainable worldview. So that was almost 40 years ago. IONS is about to celebrate its 40th anniversary, and
that is incredible. I can't believe it.
Yeah, time goes by. It's amazing. But so then for myself, you know, I've been there half of that time, and we had a gentleman who came to the organization. He was a very successful, no-nonsense businessman who had one of these kind of transformational experiences. He had been on the deck of a retreat center on the Pacific Ocean. He had stepped out from the program he was doing, looked out at the ocean, and suddenly had one of these unitive experiences. And it fundamentally changed his life. It changed his relationships with his family, with his work, with his own, you know, physical well-being. And he then wondered, well, was that real? You know, was that something that is going to last? Is that something that is weird about me, or have other people had this experience? And if they have, how could we study it and learn more about it so that we could reproduce it for other people? So he had the financial means to help support the beginnings of that project. And so we began very tentatively, I'll say, because we wanted to see what was out there in the literature already. We found that there wasn't much in terms of serious research on consciousness transformation. In fact, there was almost nothing. There had been some preliminary efforts by Maslow or Erickson, but very little. And so what we found, if you looked into the medical and scientific literature in terms of descriptions of these experiences, was largely pathological. These were considered to be, you know, psychotic. They were considered to be delusional. You know, certainly they weren't something that was going to have an impact in a positive way on our psychology. And yet what we were finding is that, you know, an experience like Richard Gunther described was very positive, had a very enhancing effect for himself and for his relationships. So that led us to do some focus groups. We called together the teachers and masters of transformational practices living in Northern California. There are a number of them. It's a rich population for transformation. So, and that's a curious thing too, why California? But what happened then is we began to identify some patterns, and that led us to create a list of questions. And we took that list of 20 questions out to 60 masters from different world traditions, you know, whether it be religious traditions or cultural practices, some of the emergent forms like Angie Irian and the Fourfold Way, or Michael Harner, or Stan Grof's, you know, holotropic breath work. So looking at a lot of different approaches and then interviewing them in a systematic way. We actually spent a couple of years doing that and then analyzing those data to see whether there were patterns and regularities. From that, we wrote the book, Living Deeply, And we also created a survey instrument that we were able to take out to about 1,500 people so that we could begin to calibrate how much were the patterns we were finding amongst these masters who really did drop out and go live in a cave compared to the average householder who, hadn't given up their whole life to engage in transformation. And we found a lot of parallels, and that then, allowed us to move forward to do some longitudinal research with different practitioners. But ultimately, the takeaway story that we found in terms of these patterns and regularities was that there is a kind of change model, and we call it a noetic change model, where people have these direct personal experiences. They can either deny them or they can begin to be curious about them. If they deny them, it can often lead to more rigidity of whatever their pre-existing worldview is. But if they can see it as an opening and as a possibility, and it may not just be one experience, it may be many. It's often not a positive experience. It's often a negative one where people have, an illness or the death of a loved one, the loss of a job, a divorce. It can be something that's destabilizing. So
that's really important, I think, for people to hear. I just want to pause at that because it is so common for something life-altering to be seen as negative rather than holding the seeds of transformation as it's happening.
I think it's really important for all of us because it can be so scary when we have these moments. And yet, George Leonard, who wrote a book called Transformation in the 70s, he always talked about taking the hit as a gift. So how do you rally your resilience so that when life challenges you, you can really see it as an opportunity for growth, for development, for a new perspective? I think it is really a great message for people as they're struggling, and we all are at different times in our lives.
Yes.
So that led us then to the second phase of the change model, which is this idea of exploration and, people going out and being curious, trying to find new information. When Edgar Mitchell came back from the moon, he had no idea what he'd experienced, and it was confusing to him. And so he went out and he talked to people, and he tried to understand what, both science and the spiritual teachers might tell him. And I think, over this 40 years, the Institute of Noetic Sciences has been a wonderful resource for people in that process of exploration. How can they get reliable, valid information that will help them to understand what they just experienced? And so that becomes sort of the second phase of it. Almost always people describe the importance of a practice. So as we're trying to live into a new worldview or a new way of understanding our place in reality, these transformative practices become very, very powerful. So, as I mentioned, we interviewed people from all these different traditions. So whether it was a Catholic priest or a pagan witch or an atheist or whoever it happened to be, you can say, well, how would there be any commonalities across those practices?
Okay.
And yet we found a number of commonalities. There's sort of 5 dimensions that we pulled out. The first is intention, that I bring an intention to have this meaningful transformation in my life. And yet we know that intention alone isn't enough, and that, people make these New Year's resolutions every year, and by the, second week of January, we've pretty much forgotten we even made a resolution, let alone what it was going to be. So intention is important. It's vital for people as they begin to set the path, but it isn't alone enough. And so we talk about the second aspect of these transformative practices as attention. So how do these practices help us to shift our attention, our awareness? We know, for example, from cognitive neuroscience that there are blinders that we experience every day. We call them inattentional blindness, where our culture primes us through our expectations to see certain things or to experience certain things. But in that process, there are many, many things we're missing, many aspects of life that we're just not attending to. And so these mindfulness practices, for example, meditation, contemplative prayer, immersion in nature, walking a labyrinth, all offer an opportunity to begin to shift our attention, our awareness. And it can be a shift from that outer authority to a kind of inner guidance system. So the third piece then is this idea of repetition. Just like going to the gym, building a new muscle group, if we want to live into a new way of being, if we want to transform our lives, it requires this kind of repetitive action that will build new habits. And so it can be some kind of spiritual practice. It can be as simple as bringing mindfulness, intention, attention to our gardening or our dishwashing or our playing with our children. Whatever it is, it's doing it in a repetitive way that allows us to bring about a new steady state, a new way of habitually operating. And that takes time. That is not a simple thing that we just do overnight. It's, these transformations can happen seemingly in a moment, but oftentimes when you dig into it, and what we found in the research is that it's a much longer process, and it takes care and feeding, as it were. The fourth piece is guidance, and nearly all of the people we interviewed talked about the importance of a reliable teacher, a coach. It could be a book. It could be something that was, a lecture, like somebody tuning into this conversation. Could be enough to really help ground them and give them a new path or a new set of practices. So one of the most important pieces of that for us in terms of this noetic change model is the shift from outer guidance, thinking that I need to get my insights from somebody else, to really cultivating our capacity to trust our own inner wisdom and the guidance that can come from our own intuition, our awareness, and to really begin to set a new course. So those are sort of the four principles: intention, attention, repetition, and guidance. And then I like to think of them as wrapped in the arms of surrender. Because ultimately, transformations in consciousness are not necessarily about a shift in the outer world. It's not like all of a sudden the rainbows all come out and it's la la land. It's really the shift in our own ability to see those rainbows even if they're hidden, and to surrender to the fact that the rainbows may come on a rainy day. They may come on a foggy day where there is no ability to see the spectrums of light. And so there's this surrendering to what is so, because in each moment we have the opportunity to practice these consciousness transformations. So that's the essence of the practices. And then just to complete the change model, we really saw that people, needed to move off their pillow, out of the pew, and into life. And so these worldview transformations really become about living our lives in a new way, not just having a practice on a day of the week and then going out and doing their normal behaviors, but really beginning to imbue every moment, from the exchange we have at the grocery store with the cashier to the ticket taker at the bridge, and that
it's how to walk the talk. It's how to live it, not just have it be with you in the cave. So bringing it out into your life and your family, and that's a big practice.
And imbuing it and remembering it. And so the remembering part can be challenging. And so having a community that can help support us, can help us remember, can help us calibrate. Well, did I, see that one the way I wanted to see it? Was that the right way? Or people describe having little reminders, like the little bobble-headed Buddha that people put on their dashboard of their car, or the crucifix, or whatever it is that helps people to remember. And not just in some casual way, but because it's so easy to fall back into our old practices. So how do we keep reminding ourselves? How do we find the supportive community? And then how do we begin to build this shift from the me? It's about my personal transformation. It's about my practice. It's about my life, to a greater appreciation for the we. And how is it that we're co-creating, that we're collaborating, and that my actions impact the actions and experiences of other people? And so really that shift from the me to the we, but also we point out it's really important to remember that a healthy me is essential to that kind of identification with the broader we. So it's not like you should just give up any sense of autonomy and individuation. It's about how do I hold a healthy individuation in the context of a greater abundance of connectedness. And then finally, you know, this idea that we talk about living deeply. This is the living deeply as we take it in every day, knowing there's going to be pain, knowing there's going to be obstacles, knowing we're going to get distracted and forget, that ultimately imbuing our lives with that can lead to greater satisfaction, greater sense of purpose, greater sense of meaning. And ultimately, I think this model that we're describing has implications for full systems change, because you can think about applying everything I just said to education or healthcare or business or community. And in each case, you know, allowing ourselves to be a catalyst for that kind of paradigm shift.
So if we take that and we take, let's just make it the average listener here who's struggling, who is dealing with some financial stress or family or relationship stress. I mean, just the meat and potatoes of daily life, and not, you know, their beingness isn't in the midst of transformation. And maybe they have, for example, they've learned to be of service, and they're caught in between being of service to family and community and torn of selfishness. Kind of where's been your experience of the best place to start? You know, they didn't have that noetic experience to kind of start down that road. They're just sitting in the quandary of living and struggling and trying their best. Where would you point them to begin?
Well, I think that was the beginning, and whatever the name is we call it, if there's something that causes us to question, to challenge our assumptions, to feel a disquiet, that is the moment, and it has all the potentials of a more enhanced life from that little speck of discomfort. And then I like to invite people to do simple things. You know, it doesn't require, you know, changing your whole life in a moment. It doesn't. It just requires little things like inviting in a spirit of curiosity. You know, I'm feeling this discomfort. I wonder if I, you know, try a different path, whether that'll feel different. What if I smile right now instead of frowning? Just what impact does that have on the next person I see? You know, those little things. Or, you know, we like to encourage people to play with paradox. Well, you know, I am really unhappy in that moment, and yet at the same time, I feel this call to continue doing this because it's good for my family. Well, it's a paradox. And, well, that's curious. So anything that's inviting an examination of our assumptions, allowing us to be a little playful, so that we don't take ourselves so seriously that we don't have the opportunity to pull back and reflect.
I think that's perfectly said, that sense of playfulness or a little bit of disattachment. I was just writing an article. I was working on some mindfulness practices, trying to take my meditation in my day, not just on my sitting cushion, and literally just watched my brain continually being kidnapped. And so I called it my inner terrorist. And at first it was like, why does it have to be there? How do I get rid of that? And there was almost a sense of violence to it until, you know, I started to come to a sense of playfulness of, maybe it's there for a reason. I wonder what it's there to teach me. I wonder if I befriended it and allowed it to be something different. And that sense of taking a different perspective, of playfulness, of inquiry, of what if, I think was beautifully said by you, is how to come from a different perspective on something that is causing you stress or strain.
Yeah, I think so. And then, you know, there are little things people can do, like taking a walk in nature, but doing it by really paying attention. You know, paying attention to the trees, listening to the breeze, smelling whatever the flowers or the bushes might offer for us. Excuse me.
Yeah, because you could take your cell phone on your walk, too, and be checking your email. So it's not just the doing, it's the how.
It's better to try to suspend that busyness, you know, for just even 10, 15 minutes. One of the greatest practices that's showing up is journaling for 15 minutes, not more, just 15 minutes about, whatever the topic is, what gives you meaning in your life, or what do I feel agitated by, or, how can I resolve this problem? Just journaling, self-reflecting, but through the writing process. It seems quite therapeutic for people. And then, there are all kinds of meditation practices, contemplative practices, prayer practices, exercise. I think that really mindful exercise can be a wonderful way of inviting in these transformations, feeling in our bodies what that sensation is like, and then, inviting in more of it. All of those can be sort of the precursors, like the planting of seeds. My co-authors, Cassie Veaton and Tina Amarick, we talked about, the kind of garden metaphor for transformation. And there are these things that we can do just to plant the seeds before the full-blown, I'm going to now take on a practice. And a practice is something that, again, it can look like anything. We talked to people who had, really deep experiences that were catalytic for them that, didn't require going to the moon and coming back. They were simple things like a lady described, looking out the window as she was washing her dishes. And suddenly, she felt something in nature as she was looking out in her backyard, and it was a kind of little epiphany moment, and she was able to kind of grow that a little bit and question it and challenge it, and then that led to sitting meditation for her and a quiet time. For me, I take a bath. I love to take a bath for, a good 15 to 30 minutes a day, and in that process, just be really quiet, not talk, not really think a lot. It's just a time to allow my mind to clear. And so those are all really important things I think that people can do in an easy way without thinking that this is, going to be just boot camp.
Did you find that those catalytic experiences could be that they dropped in, or that they could be promoted by the practices and lifestyle that catalyzed the change model, so to speak?
Yeah, Starhawk is a Wiccan leader and writer, and she talked about how the epiphanies lead to the practice, but the practice leads to the epiphanies. And so it's a both and. You can have these experiences that, if you pay attention, can lead to the steps necessary to change our lives in positive, productive ways. And as we begin to engage in those practices, we begin to see more as that inattentional blindness shifts, as we pay attention in a different way to what has meaning and purpose in our lives. We can begin to invite in those moments of transformation. So I think it's a both and. I think life, if we're paying attention, presents these moments, whether we like them or not. And it's also possible that through, these various practices of curiosity, walking in nature, taking a bath, meditating, playing with our children, our grandchildren, all of those can invite us in to a deeper sense of who we are and what we're capable of becoming.
I wanted to just a little bit of kind of the flip side. We're speaking a lot and using words of transformative experiences, but as soon as we start to set our intention on something, let's call it positive for lack of a better word, of something that which we desire, there's often an equal and opposite amount of seeds that were placed for weeds, not just the flowers, from our childhood, from traumas, from past experiences, that will often come up and raise their heads as we set our intention to meditate, to do these practices. What would you advise, or what are some of the thoughts you'd like to share about how to best deal with the weeds in our garden, so to speak?
Well, I liked what you said, which is, as you're sitting and practicing and inviting in these, worthy intentions, the inner terrorist can come up. And I thought that was well said. And, so I'd love to turn the question back to you and ask your advice on that. But just, before I do that, I think that that's part of it. It's breathing into that, finding that place in our solar plexus that can just breathe into the anxiety and breathe out and know that it's there, and to the extent we can befriend it rather than trying to push it down, I think it takes on less energy. But what would be your response?
I think that's a great start. First is just that practice in the separation, the practice in the witnessing, and I think contemplative practices like meditation help to develop that I am not that anger. I am not that resentment. I am not that, because it feels like I am when I'm feeling it. You know, that felt sense is that's who I am. And the practices of being able to witness and separate is like, oh, I'm me, and I'm noticing there's anger in my body right now. Oh, I'm still this fabulous, great, whatever person and father, et cetera, but right now I have this feeling and these chemicals and these thoughts that aren't synonymous with those good things. So first is just developing that witnessing capacity, and like you said in the change model, the repetition of practicing so that the refractory periods that it takes to realize that get shorter and shorter. And I agree with you that takes practice and time. And once you can have a little bit of distance, then as you start to develop different practices, whatever they are, of, oh, what do I want to do with that? Do I want to learn from that? Do I want to write about that and journal about that? Do I want to sit with what that feels like? There are many different practices. Do I want to tap on that or whatever? But I think it's perfectly consistent with your change model. And I love the idea of playfulness, although that's certainly not always easy in the moment.
Definitely. Yeah, we are now embarked on sort of the next phase of kind of two aspects of this project that are being developed now. One is that we created a curriculum to apply some of these principles in high schools and in colleges, and now moving into adult populations as well. But we're calling it Worldview Explorations, the WE project, and really looking at how it is that young people can be invited to question their assumptions, to invite these kinds of states of curiosity and playfulness, recognizing that they have a worldview, that everything that they experience in their lives is shaped through that lens of perception, that worldview. Mm-hmm. And there may be a multiplicity of worldviews as we become more aware of what's guiding us. There may be different competing interests within each of us. But really recognizing that we have these worldviews, that other people have different views than ours, and that there are tools and capacities that we can develop to engage one another more fully. And so that idea of my worldview, our worldview, and then the third piece of the curriculum is really how do we then engage the world, knowing that there are these multiple points of view, multiple perspectives, that we may not always agree with one another, but again, if we can come from this place of curiosity and from a playfulness, an invitation to invite in different perspectives, not saying they're all equal, all good, but that they're different, and as we learn to be less reactive to those differences, it becomes an empowerment for us. It becomes an empowerment for kids in particular when we think about all the bullying and the abusive kinds of things that are happening in classrooms. We really feel like this is a kind of skill set or a literacy, as it were, that people can learn, teachers can teach. And so that's an important area, and actually Katya Peterson and I are going to be teaching this Worldview Explorations at the Esalen Institute. That'll be in the spring, and people can just check the Esalen catalog for that if they're interested.
What about if they can't get to Esalen? Do you do anything online or?
We do. Well, we just finished a telecourse on Worldview Explorations, and we'll certainly be scheduling another one. The one that's coming up for us is, really about the big transformation, which has to do with death and what happens after. And so I'm working on a feature film with Deepak Chopra called Death Makes Life Possible. And it has built on the transformation work, extended beyond it. We've done lots of new interviews with people from different cultures. What is the cosmology that they hold about what happens after we die? And in that process, we've also created an educational program. And so beginning the third week in January, through the Institute of Noetic Sciences, we'll be offering this telecourse, so people anywhere in the world can tune in. It'll also offer continuing education credits for people who are, healing practitioners, nurses, I think we've got social workers, I forget the other categories. But again, if people went to noetic.org, the website will provide information under the educational programs about that training program. And I think it's a nice opportunity for people to explore their own models, working a lot in terms of the research on this topic around the concept of terror management theory, that we really have a kind of core existential terror around this topic of death. Many people do, not everybody. But that as we gain a greater understanding of it and a greater appreciation for these different worldviews, that we can begin to heal our relationship and ultimately channel it into pro-social behaviors. So those are some things. Noetic.org has a lot of great resources on it for people to, engage this exploration around transformation. As I said, we're going to be doing a program at the Esalen Institute in late spring. Would love for people to come and participate with that.
I will second that. I love being a member of IONS and the newsletters and the events and the classes. It's one of the richest singular locations for such a wide diversity of different aspects of healing from the individual to the world. It really is terrific. I want to thank you for all the work that you guys have been doing on expanding the resources there.
Well, thank you. And, there'll be a big conference, too, in July in Palm Springs. It'll be an opportunity to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. So we invite everybody to come and join the party. And we've got some amazing, amazing speakers. Eben Alexander, who people are talking about quite a bit right now because of his near-death experiences. And Jay Ivey is going to be there doing some of his expressive arts. And Gene Houston, a lot of really great people are going to be there to join the celebration. So
you're having a lot of fun doing this work, aren't you?
Well, it's good work. It's not always simple, I will say, but it's good work, and it's very gratifying to be able to create and express things that I think are ultimately very helpful to our planet and to each of us. So yeah, it feels like good work. I appreciate you. And I appreciate your program. I appreciate what you're doing, and you're trying to get the word out, and communication, connection, interconnection. That's what's really necessary right now. And so I want to thank you for your contributions to that.
Oh, it's my joy. And the name of the radio show, when I kind of put together the Change Your Mind and Transformational Dialogues, it literally was one made for you. In other words, how do we change our mind about our lives, and how do we transform our lives? And it's really something that you've devoted your life and career and work and energy to. So this is an easy and delightful show for me to share with you. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule.
And I also, people, if they wanted, I try, and I'm working on updating my personal website, Marilyn Schlitz.
Oh, yes, thank you.
But I do have, a lot of my publications are up there, and I will be posting events up there so people can check that out as well.
And that is, I want to make sure it's www.marilynschlitz.com, correct?
Right, exactly.
And that's, can you spell it just to make sure we're correct?
MarilynSchlitz, just like the beer.
MarilynSchlitz.com, that's easy. All right, well, I think we're going to draw to a close, so I just want to say thank you so much. I look forward to our future interactions, and I hope that this just gets shared everywhere, because I think that it has the potential to have a great impact. So thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you so very much, and have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.